Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is with me once again as we discuss Liverpool's 1-0 Merseyside derby victory over Everton. 12 points clear with 8 games to go. The Reds are going to win the Premier League title, and it was another step towards that in Wednesday's game. Before we get stuck into the podcast, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. And of course, there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box below with all of the details. Tom, let's get straight into it. Obviously, a big win for Liverpool. It's always a big win when they beat Everton. It has happened fairly frequently in recent times at Anfield, but it still feels good to do that. And Diogo Jota, the match winner as well. It was a big moment from him and a really nicely taken goal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's coming for a little bit of criticism down the week, certainly since he come back in through injury. And I think that was one of his better games, since coming back from injury for me. I think he led the line quite well. We know we possibly don't get that pressing that maybe we had with Roberto Firmino back in the day, but I think what you do get is a great finisher, and he certainly showed that. You need that bit of brilliance, I think, in games like that where they're slightly cagey, and we know there's always that element in the derby game as well where it's a bit blood and thunder, certainly in the centre of the park, and maybe that bit of quality on both sides, I think, was the difference, I feel, on the night. And Liverpool obviously edged that. You look at the league table, and Liverpool, they've extended, obviously, that lead in the Premier League now. It's 12 points ahead now for Liverpool. So, maybe that grain of doubt, that always kind of lingers there a little bit. That's kind of ebbing away, isn't it, over the course of the weeks now? And obviously there's 8 games to go now. But yeah, that goal from Diogo Jota, I thought that was a major milestone for him in the season. Like I've just referenced, a little bit of criticism coming in down the weeks about his performances. I think he's looked a little bit jaded at times, but yeah, it feels like a massive mark as well to come back after the international break, which is where Liverpool lost their only Premier League game of the season so far, up against Nottingham Forest earlier in the campaign. So yeah, it just felt like a massive moment, I think, to get that goal, and you could feel that relief in the ground as well, couldn't you?
Yeah, I was speaking to a few people heading into the game, and people were kind of a little bit split in 2 camps. I was very much in the camp that the result really against Everton didn't particularly matter in the title in the context of the title. I think Liverpool are clearly going to go on and win the Premier League. Obviously, that's not to take away from the importance of the result, but there was quite a few people who I spoke to who were a little bit more nervous and a little bit more, thinking along the lines of, maybe if this doesn't go well, and Arsenal have won the previous night. But I think it's just good to end all of those conversations, isn't it? You mentioned there the 2 games before the international break with Newcastle and PSG. Liverpool looked tired, didn't play well. I think it's fair to say the international break came at a good time, really, for Liverpool. But just to get that win, to put a stop to any kind of nervousness or edginess going into the last few games of the season, it really feels like that's behind them now, and they should hopefully be able to kick on for the next few games.
Yeah, it feels like a major kind of jumping off point now for Liverpool. I think that win in the derby, it was always a game, like you were mentioning there, I had a couple of doubts about. Obviously, you look back at the Goodison Park game, that was full of drama, wasn't it? Particularly, just before the final whistle. Obviously, they got the late equaliser in that game through Tarkowski, and that does kind of go through your mind in them games a little bit, doesn't it? If Everton were to get a set piece, and how threatening he can be. And we saw a little bit, I felt, first half with Beto, for example. He was able to get in behind. He's not the quickest over kind of the space of 5 yards, but I think that physicality maybe gave him a little bit of an edge at times, I felt, over particularly Ibrahima Konate in that back line for Liverpool. But yeah, I think, like you said there, coming into the international break, those 2 games that Liverpool lost back-to-back the first time under Arne Slot that's happened, and particularly in them circumstances as well. I think there were a couple of question marks about how Liverpool would respond, and I've said about the Forest game earlier in the season, obviously that came off the back of an international break, so there was a couple of doubts there for me kind of coming into the Everton game, but I think Liverpool did really well to kind of silence the noise around the game as well. And it was one of them games, like I said before, it was slightly cagey. I wouldn't have been so surprised if it would have ended up 0-0, to be honest. I think the two teams kind of cancelled each other out, but I think Liverpool had the lion's share of the possession, particularly in the second half, and I think Liverpool deserved it on the night. I felt that the performance, like I say, in the second half after the break, I think was what edged it for Liverpool on the night. And I think Arne Slot, he's got to take credit for that. I think the setup on the night, he made a couple of gambles, if you like, in terms of his selection. Curtis Jones at right back, obviously making that decision to not put in Quansah from the start, and I think that really worked for Liverpool. He become a little bit of an outlet, didn't he? We know how good he is on the ball. He maybe weren't expected to be pulling the strings so much from right back in a kind of Trent role, if you like, but I think he did his best, I think, on the night, and I don't think, the likes of Jack Harrison on the night, he didn't really challenge him too much, I felt. I think he dealt with him really well. I felt Curtis Jones, but still, he's a good quality winger, isn't he? And I felt that, just kind of defensively, he didn't put a foot wrong as well. So, yeah, there was performances across the park. Ryan Gravenberch, for example, we saw before the international break, he looked a little bit leggy. I thought he looked refreshed. Obviously, he got sent home from international duty, and he looked like he had that extra 5% to give. So, yeah, I think it came at the right time for Liverpool, that international break, and hopefully now we can use it as a bit of a springboard, I think, that victory against Everton.
Yeah, you mentioned Curtis Jones there. He's obviously one of the bigger talking points really in the game, playing position. He has played before once. I think it was against Leicester in the Carabao Cup a couple of seasons ago. And obviously the Everton game is potentially going to be a completely different sort of test for him. Obviously wasn't massively tested. I thought Alcaraz was coming inside quite a lot. He was on that side. Obviously Jack Harrison as well can be dangerous, but didn't particularly do much in the game. It was more a case of him having to get on the ball and keep things, just simple passes, 1-2s, things like that. But being able to keep up that pressure, I think that's definitely something that Arne Slot must have identified. Of Jarell Quansah is decent on the ball for a centre back, but he's certainly nothing like Trent Alexander-Arnold. And on the sliding scale of how good each of those players are in possession, certainly Curtis Jones is a lot closer to Trent than that. But do you think that's something that we might see again in the future, or was this a one-off just because of obviously the circumstances of Bradley and Gomez not being there? Obviously, we expect Trent to move on in the summer, so potentially might need another option in that area. Do you think Curtis Jones is someone who can do that role and might see that as a way to get a few more minutes, or was this just a complete one-off and the circumstances probably won't sort of find themselves in that way again in the future?
I was a little bit surprised, obviously, when he was weighing up his options in the media coming into the game. He did mention that, didn't he, that Curtis can play right back, and like you say, he's played there once before against Leicester. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised when I saw the lineup. I was trying to kind of work out what the formation was, and when I see it in front of me, I couldn't quite believe it. But I think he played really well, didn't he? And yeah, possibly that is an option now going forward. I mean, like touched upon there, I think Quansah at right back, he's more your sort of traditional defender, really. He's a traditional centre-back, isn't he? So I think expecting him to move forward and maybe having that kind of eye for a pass and stuff like that, you maybe lose that in that final third. And yeah, I think that was maybe what went through the manager's mind, I think, coming into the game. And yeah, you look at kind of, the minutes that he did play against PSG, Quansah, and then obviously moving into the cup final as well. I felt Liverpool lost that bit of creativity, but particularly in the cup final, actually. I think that was one of the aspects of the performance that possibly cost Liverpool on the day. I felt Quansah was okay defensively, but yeah, I think just kind of what Jones can give you, maybe while we're still kind of waiting for the likes of Bradley to come back from injury and then eventually Trent as well. It is a bit of an option there. And I think long term, you're kind of looking at the summer now, aren't you, in terms of can you get an addition through the door? The likes of Frimpong have been mentioned, for instance, at Bayer Leverkusen, and we saw earlier in the season what he can do at Anfield. But yeah, I feel that possibly, it is a bit of an option there for the manager. And he's like what he's seen in training from him. It must be, he has mentioned it coming into the game that he felt that he could play there. And yeah, I was really impressed with his performance, and I felt he was quite good in terms of marauding forward as well. Obviously, he is a midfield player, so maybe you would expect that. But he offered a bit of a threat down that right-hand side, a different kind of threat to maybe what you get from Trent as well. And, obviously, as more of an offensive player, it's always kind of good to be able to keep possession in that area of the pitch, isn't it? And to have an eye for a pass and just having that extra body kind of joining the attack. I felt it had a great influence on the rest of Liverpool's player. I saw Gravenberch in the first half. He was marauding forward, which we saw in the first half of the season a lot more, didn't we? We haven't seen that so much as he's tired over the course of the second half of the season. So, yeah, I was really impressed with what Jones was able to do, sort of tactically on the pitch as well. I think it really opened Liverpool up, and I'm kind of hoping now moving forward. You mentioned about the Fulham game coming up. I'm hoping that we kind of see that moving forward now.
Yeah, he's such an intelligent footballer, isn't he? He's, I think, underrated really in terms of how he thinks about the game. He spoke, I think, to the BBC afterwards and sort of said, he's someone who studies the game and feels like he can play in a variety of different positions. He clearly sees himself as a midfielder, and I think that is where we will see him again very shortly, as soon as, if Conor Bradley is back fit again for the weekend, for example, and expect him to go straight back in there. But I think there are games, Everton, a team that was always going to sit in and try and counter-attack. There's maybe, some of the lesser teams next season at home at Anfield where you're having to break down a low block. If Liverpool don't have Trent, then, maybe that is an option. Maybe it's not going to be something we see often, but I think it's probably worked well enough that you can possibly see that moving forwards, even if it's not going to be a regular thing in the team. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Mohamed Salah as well, obviously, on that side. A little bit different for him, with not having his usual player behind him in Trent, a completely different sort of option for him. And he was fairly quiet. I've seen a few different pundits. I think Stephen Warnock was one who said he was non-existent in the game, which I thought was a little bit harsh. I think he was definitely better than PSG and Newcastle. But is that a worry for you at all? Obviously didn't play well before the international break, didn't have a huge influence in the Everton game as well. Obviously, Diogo Jota has stepped up, which is important for Liverpool, that you've got other options and you don't always have to rely on Salah to do that. But is that at all a worry for you, or do you expect to see a much better and much improved performance from him again at the weekend?
Yeah, I did think he was quite quiet in the game, and I think coming off the back of the cup final, there's been a couple of mentions of maybe Chiesa coming in, a point maybe giving Salah that little bit of a rest. But I think, the key for Liverpool now in these last 8 games of the season in the Premier League, I think, is to have your best players on the pitch. So I fully expect them to start the vast majority of them games now until hopefully the title is sewn up. So, the talk coming out of the ground obviously was, we're 4 wins away essentially now from lifting the Premier League title. And I think given how, league seasons kind of play out, it's a marathon, not a sprint, isn't it? And I think possibly that, that drama of the Champions League that we've got so used to down the years, you don't kind of have that so much in the league, do you? And I think just kind of churning out results now is the most important thing. And although he didn't make a massive impact on the game last night, I still felt he was a bit of a presence there. And, he was kind of drawing in defenders, and I always felt that sense of intimidation for Everton, particularly when he was on the ball. But yeah, like you say, I think coming into the international break, his numbers maybe dropped a little bit. He obviously went on that, spectacular run, didn't he? At the start of the calendar year. I think he scored in, something like 6 consecutive games for Liverpool in the Premier League, didn't he? So he was making a massive impact in games at that period of the season. But I think the last game where he really kind of took the game by the scruff of the neck that I can remember was the Southampton game. But yeah, that was kind of the start of that block of games, wasn't it? Of obviously PSG and Newcastle heading into the international break. So yeah, I think possibly he has looked a little bit jaded in recent times, I have to admit. But I think it is imperative now that Liverpool have a player of his quality on the pitch. And, that talk of Chiesa and players maybe stepping in, I think that's maybe for next season when he's got kind of a pre-season under his belt in terms of Chiesa. I think that Salah's the one now for these final 8 games of the season, just to kind of get that job done in the league. I think it's imperative. And I think that's probably the most important thing for the manager now, I'd say.
Yeah, there was a lot of chat, wasn't there, about Chiesa, obviously off the back of looking quite sharp in the few minutes that he had off the bench. But I was never expecting him to sort of start, or obviously in the end doesn't come off the bench against Everton either. It always felt pretty unlikely that was the case. And I always think the conversation about Mohamed Salah has sort of gone a little bit silly in some ways in terms of, his lack of influence at certain times. There doesn't seem to be the scrutiny on one or two other players. Obviously in the Everton game, it was Diogo Jota that stepped up, and that's what you need, really, isn't it? The difference, really, in the PSG and the Newcastle games for me wasn't that Salah was less effective than usual, even though he quite clearly was compared to the rest of the season. It was more the case that if you quieten Salah, then there's nobody else really to step up and take control and do things, just pull something out of nothing, as Jota did when he skips past a couple of people in the penalty area and slots the ball into the back of the net. So as long as Liverpool have got one or two other players that are playing well, I think it's much less of an issue, really. And that kind of leads us nicely on to Luis Diaz as well, who's got quite a fair amount of plaudits, I'd say, for his performance. He did pretty well, I thought, but I wasn't quite as impressed with him as some people were, just in terms of there wasn't quite that final pass or final shot that was able to test Jordan Pickford. He looked lively, but he never quite managed to do that last little bit, which is obviously the most important and the most difficult thing to do in the final third. But what did you make of his performance? Were you as impressed as some people, or were you a little bit closer to me in thinking that he was good, but he wasn't great?
Yeah, I think he's an odd one to assess at times, because obviously, we were speaking about Mohamed Salah there before, and you look at his record in this calendar year, the amount of goals he's been able to score. Diaz has only got one in the Premier League so far in this calendar year in 2025. So I think there's that concern there that you touch upon it in the final third, maybe his final pass, maybe his final shot. He does get the odd opportunity, and I feel sometimes he fails to pull the trigger at the right times and that sort of thing. And yeah, there was a little bit of lingering sort of frustration for me after what was a great performance in terms of his energy levels, let's say, and being able to get on the ball. I think one thing I will always say about him is he always shows for the ball. He's a player who doesn't shy away from that. He does take responsibility in that final third, leading the attack at times for Liverpool. Salah possibly doesn't get on the ball so much in terms of creating things, and we know his assist record, but he's often the player who's not kind of carving out opportunities in terms of sort of maze and runs and that sort of thing. That's more Diaz's game, and we saw that at points, I think, in the first half, particularly last night. And I felt that possibly that was the frustration for me last night, that I again was kind of on the edge of the main stand, kind of Annie Road end last night, and so I got a frontline kind of view of his game last night at points, and I felt that possibly that final pass wasn't there, and I felt that frustration in that part of the ground was certainly there. You could hear that was quite vocal. And yeah, I think it's a bit of an odd one, because I did look at social media after the game, and obviously you got a lot of plaudits for the performance, but I think that was more for his energy, from what I can tell. I think that was much improved, and that was great to see. I think the energy overall in the team was much improved upon what we've seen in recent weeks, which was a relief, to be honest with you. I think certain games heading into the international break, that was a concern. So to see that back in full force, the likes of Dominic Szoboszlai looked incredible, I think, at times last night. That pressing game and stepping in where Jota maybe isn't able to do that, leading from the front line. But yeah, I felt maybe that final pass, the final shot from Diaz, we said at points this season already so far, was maybe lacking last night. And you're hoping in them final 8 games of the season that he kind of finds his shooting boots now. Because like I say, it's 1 goal in the Premier League in 2025, which I think will be a concern for the manager.
Yeah, it feels like an obvious area that you can improve, really, in the team, which makes it interesting sort of looking ahead to the weekend. Obviously, you'd expect Mohamed Salah to play, as we've mentioned many times. He plays when he's fit, whether he's in good form or not. You'd expect him to be on the right-hand side. But then there's maybe a couple of decisions to be made. Again, I'd be surprised if Federico Chiesa had a shout of playing against Fulham, possibly might get a chance off the bench. But obviously, Luis Diaz was impressive to an extent. Diogo Jota looked much sharper generally, as we've said, and obviously gets the goal as well. But I thought it was interesting that Cody Gakpo didn't start, obviously comes off the bench, didn't look fit, certainly before the international break, but I watched him for the Netherlands against Spain and looked very sharp in that, scored a good goal in that game. And I did think that he would come straight back into the team, possibly ahead of Jota. So obviously Arne Slot got the decision right because that was the player that scored the winning goal. But what would you expect at the weekend? Do you expect maybe Cody Gakpo to come back in, or will he have to be a little bit more patient to get back into the team again?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a long recovery for Gakpo, hasn't it? Since obviously he got injured and, kind of working him back into that first 11. I think maybe the intensity of what's expected from that front line, particularly that left wing position. We say about Mohamed Salah maybe saving his legs in games and waiting to pounce upon the opportunities. And I think there is that pressure maybe on the left winger in that three-pronged attack, maybe to lead the press at times. And, Dominic Szoboszlai behind them as well seems to be the man who kind of steps in for the likes of Jota, in terms of that pressing game. So there seems to be a lot of responsibility on that left-hand side, and maybe that is the concern for the manager in terms of saving his legs and that sort of thing. But you're hoping now that the Fulham game, it's the game, it's kind of glaring for me that, it's set up for Gakpo now, hopefully, to come back in. And yeah, I've been a little bit, again, frustrated that, he's not been able to, get them minutes in the legs. Obviously, we saw the cup final. He looked jaded from the start when he did come on. And that was really unfortunate because we know how good he is. And, particularly from the bench at times this year as well, he had a bit of almost a job share, didn't he, with Cody Gakpo earlier in the season. And that really, really worked well for Arne Slot. I think that got the best out of the both players, maybe that healthy competition within the ranks and that sort of thing for a starting slot. But that's kind of ebbed away because of the injury and maybe rehabilitating them in terms of getting them minutes in the legs. But yeah, I think now's the right time, hopefully, heading into that Fulham game to maybe see him come back in from the start. And I think Liverpool have really missed him. I think he's far and away for me being Liverpool's best attacker other than Mohamed Salah so far this season. I think he's got 16 goals in all competitions, which, we've spoken a little bit about Liverpool's other attackers needing to chip in with goals, and I feel he's the only one really who maybe is going to come away with sort of more of a respectable tally so far for this season. You're hoping that Diaz can maybe get back in amongst the goals maybe in the back end of this campaign, but yeah, I felt that that's kind of tailed off for him a little bit. And yeah, maybe Cody Gakpo coming back in as well might give Diaz a little bit of a rest and ensure that he's a little bit more fresh heading into the business end of the season now. Obviously, there's 8 games to go, so we're in them kind of final 10 games of the campaign. So, it's a really important stage of the season, and you're hoping that both of them players, Diaz and Gakpo, can make a big impact from now until the end of the campaign.
Yeah, I think the use of both of those players will be interesting. Arne Slot mentioned that, I think it was in his press conference on Thursday morning, actually, ahead of the Fulham game, that there's only one game a week, so the players are going to have to get used to that. But he's going to have to get used to that as well now, without any other competitions to focus on. You've got, 2 really, really high quality players in that left wing position, but obviously not both of them can start in that same role. There's going to be, big decisions to be made there. But I think for me, Cody Gakpo would be the one that I'd go for at the weekend. But I think that does then give him a difficult decision because he does seem to really like Luis Diaz. He likes having him in the team. If it's not on the left wing, he plays him through the middle. But I think with Diogo Jota, he's very much a streaky player who, once he gets into the groove, once he scored once, you expect him then to go on and maybe get 2 or 3 in the next 5 or 6 games, just because that's the kind of player that he is when he's fit and he's confident. He does tend to take those chances. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how they line up and how they use the squad. And obviously it might be instructive as well heading into what is going to be a big summer. I think there is definitely upgrades out there on Luis Diaz, but it's obviously not quite that simple, and Liverpool are going to have quite a lot to think about, as we've obviously spoken about quite a lot on this podcast over the last few weeks. But just before we wrap up then, obviously Fulham on Sunday. It's usually a tricky game. Liverpool won there last season, but only by a narrow margin. Fulham are a team that do play some good stuff and they're quite a good team to watch at times. I think it should be quite an entertaining game. But what are you expecting? Are you expecting Liverpool to win again? And are you expecting Arsenal to win this game, to win their game, I should say, over the weekend as well?
Yeah, I mean, Fulham, they gave Liverpool a really good game earlier in the season, didn't they? And it was a dramatic game as well. Obviously, Andy Robertson got sent off early on, didn't he? And I think that maybe clouded the game a little bit in terms of, how I can sort of assess it and judge it. But yeah, going down to 10 men, I think really cost Liverpool that day. But yeah, I think they're a tricky side. They're always they're well set up under Marco Silva, aren't they? And I think he is a really good coach. And yeah, I think they're teetering around 8th or 9th in the league now, aren't they? So yeah, I think it's been a great performance from them all around, I must say, over the course of this season. And yeah, I think they're a team that, they play good football, and I think that they'll be difficult to kind of get the ball off at times, and maybe that'll play into Liverpool's hands a little bit. There has been a couple of occasions so far in the league and the Champions League so far this season where Liverpool have been happy not to have the lion's share of the possession, so maybe that might play into Liverpool's hands a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a tricky game going away to Craven Cottage. Obviously, it's a good atmosphere down there. It's one of them grounds, I think, which has been difficult. You say that obviously we won there last season, so you're hopeful that we can continue that. But yeah, moving into the weekend as well with Arsenal playing against Everton, we saw how difficult a game that was last night for Liverpool. I think we had 70% of the possession last night, so we had a lot of the ball. But yeah, breaking down that side is really difficult. They form into two banks of four, don't they? They've got Beto leading the line. He's happy to kind of wait for his opportunity. He maybe only gets a couple in the game, but he's physical. He can lead the line well. I think he, that rough and tumble really kind of suited him with Ibrahim Konate on that right-hand side of the defence last night. I think that maybe that was the difficult thing for Liverpool to kind of get to grips with, particularly first half last night. So I'm expecting up against Arsenal, they're great defensively, as we know, but I think Everton under David Moyes, I think they've only lost a couple of games in 11 now, so they've got a decent record as well. So you're hoping again that Everton can do Liverpool a little bit of a favour on the weekend, and that 12-point margin that Liverpool have got now, we're hoping that Liverpool can extend that potentially. But I think it is going to be a really tricky game down at Fulham, and Liverpool are going to have to work for the victory ultimately.
Yeah, I was down there last season when they won 3-1, and that was one of the games most interestingly, I think, in terms of what happened, was that Ryan Gravenberch scored and looked really good, and that was probably one of the first times that we've seen a sort of hint of what might have been to come for him as well. Obviously, I'm sure he will be in the starting 11 for Liverpool down at Craven Cottage as well this weekend. So yeah, it should certainly be an interesting couple of games. It wouldn't shock me actually if both Liverpool and Arsenal drop points this weekend, because they've both got tricky fixtures. But either way, as we said at the top of the show, I think Liverpool are in such a good position with just 8 games left. It would be a big surprise if there was too much pressure put on them before that title is confirmed. But I think we'll leave it there for this week. Thank you, Tom, for joining me. Thank you to everyone at home as well for watching along and listening to the latest Liverpool.com podcast. We'll be back next week with the next edition of the show right here on the Blood Red Channel.